much.
I think the best study happens when you're allowed to share your reactions to things and to hear other people's reactions. So certainly in our meetings together, I want to encourage us to talk, not just to me, but to each other. But for just today, and I, being a part of this group, so I know the group kind of comes and goes. Some people come and then don't come and things happen. But I'd like to just go briefly around the room, say your name, and tell us what brought you here to read about world religions. This is not a very common interest for people. I'm obsessed with it. So I'm delighted to find some people who would show up to do that. So I'm going to start with Jody, your name, and just a couple of sentences about what interests you about.
Okay, hi, I'm Jody Hendrickson. I first read this book about 1985 and I haven't looked at it since. But through my entire adult life, I've kind of been, I became disillusioned with my Catholic upbringing, 16 years of parochial schools, and started searching for other belief systems and have done a lot of that over the last few years. And actually, Joan and Laura and I were at a pre-Christmas gathering, and I think I was the one who brought the topic of the book up, and now we're here to talk about it.
Wonderful, thank you. Brenda Wolf. I think I had to get to be my age to really get interested again in religion, and traveling really caused me to become interested in different religions when I went to different countries, and along with the culture and the food and everything, of course, it's the religion. And now I'm nuts about it. So, but I, maybe 20 years ago, not so much.
And you said you were in Saudi Arabia for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
Where everyone is Muslim.
Yes.
And that's a really different experience, isn't it?
Yes, I had to basically be a Muslim.
Yeah. Nikki.
Well, I'm Nikki Kafton, I'm Laura's sister. We were brought up in a family where there wasn't any real religion at all, except that my father was raised Catholic, and he always encouraged us to explore other religions. And, I just was sort of mildly interested in that when I was younger, but I have to say, I started watching the Joseph Campbell interviews with Bill Moyers, and that's what really got me interested in multiple religions. And so I feel like this is sort of carrying through because I always wanted to go into more detail.
Bill Moyers also did a series with Huston Smith.
Did he?
Yes, it wasn't as popular as Joseph Campbell, but it's very good.
I think I may have a link to it on that same
Oh, good.
webpage. I'm not sure. Some of his older programs. And I'm Laura, the librarian here, and I've always been interested in cultures and religions. And as Nikki said, we were raised where my dad actually took us to different churches every weekend, but that would have been Christian in Green Bay, De Pere area. I am now married to a Muslim heritage person, so I have that influence that I'm very interested in. So that's basically
And
it.
thank you, Laura, for putting this group together. I mean, I love to discuss this book, and we did bring it up at the Christmas party, and then all of a sudden Laura said, would you like to lead the group at the library?
Yeah.
It took me about 5 seconds to say yes. Okay, let's go over to Amanda.
All right, I'm Amanda Horton, and I wanted to be a part of this group because I feel that I know a smattering of maybe facts about a lot of different religions, but I've never really, since college, I haven't really been able to look seriously at all the different religions that are covered in this book.
Great. Marty?
I'm Marty Blumenfeld, her husband. I was trained as an Orthodox Jew and abandoned it the day I got bar mitzvah. I'm now an atheist. And, I was a college professor. I met people with all kinds of backgrounds in religion, and we talked about things. And I think this would be a very interesting discussion.
Great. And David?
Yes, my name is David Jenks. I thought it would be a good point to pin myself down like a wrestling match because I've been all over the map on religious collections, and one of them was Sufism from a general outside point, and I thought this would be a good point to kind of bring those together at in my mind and maybe make an outline of where I'm at. So that I could go forward in a, kind of mental way, thoughtful way, or even active way to bring it to some conclusion before, because it's a big question bubble.
That's what we call it, a seeker.
Yeah.
You're a seeker.
It's a secret to me, to my own
Looking for
self.
answers. Okay, Tom?
Yeah, my name's Tom Walter and I was brought up a Catholic and I've always been interested in philosophical things and world religion. I think this will be interesting.
Great. Carol?
I'm Carol Weiss and again, I'm sitting in a room with many Catholics.
Many
Former-
Catholics?
Many former Catholics of years and years of schooling, right? Anyway, one statement that always stuck out in my mind is that man always knew there was something greater than themselves. And so how the different cultures developed their particular religions, if we want to call them religions for all of them, came to be. We watch a lot at home of how's it's made and how's it done for food and machines and everything. So I've always wondered how each culture developed on their own and then it stuck.
It is a fascinating study.
Mhm.
It really is. So we're going to go to Zoom. Chris, tell us who you are and why you came.
So I'm Chris Garcia. I'm from Wisconsin and I grew up with very kind, very Catholic parents, and I went to parochial school and I just had the kindest, smartest nuns for teachers, and it really stuck with me, that whole religion in my heart. So it's in me. But I go to different church every Sunday. I don't go to the same church because it's tough being Catholic. And I have a lot of interest in religion, but I know very little about it. So I hope I learned something.
And Chris and
It's a
I,
hard book for me to read. It's hard because I haven't thought about it that much.
Chris and I are friends. We had a mutual friend for many years who died, and then we became friends.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
thank you for being my faithful friend, Chris.
thank you.
And Laura, I can't see the name below Chris.
When,
Oh, it's Gwen.
Sorry, I was on side of her on my view. Anyway, my name is Gwen Grayboys, and I probably first got this book when I became a UU in probably the early 1990s. Our minister at that time was also a Buddhist, and I was just fascinated with this. Like so many other people here, I searched lots of religions. I was raised Presbyterian, searched lots of religions in college, never really landed on something that felt like home. My father had a very interesting perspective on religion. I remember him telling me, and I never really understood it until you read into this book, that it doesn't really matter what you are as long as you practice the values of that religion. So that was pretty forward thinking for my father. I was impressed, and now I understand he was talking about the values, not about the culture that's attached to the different religions.
Okay, thank you. And I can't see the name below her.
Jane.
Laura, who's that?
Jane.
Bottom left.
Jane.
Jane.
I'm Jane Cushy, and I've been a part of the multicultural book group that meets at the library here once a month, and I've been a part of that group probably for nearly 20 years. And when you read fiction books about many cultures, you read smatterings about various religions, and I just thought it would be neat to learn a little bit more about religions, and I think we're all kind of an age, but the older I get, I find the less I know for sure.
I'll go for that. Barb Hansen.
Hi. Well, I'm Barb Hansen. I just learned about the group in the last hour. So I haven't read the book, but I was able to get connected with Zoom, and actually I'm not in Sturgeon Bay, I'm in Florida. And Joan and I have known each other for quite a long time, and I thought this would be a wonderful forum to be part of. I grew up in a conservative religious home, and I've moved a great distance from that. And I'm eager to get the book and get into it. But I want to listen to you people today.
Thank you, Barb. And I can't see the last one, Carol.
Dorothy.
Hi,
Dorothy.
hello, I'm Dorothy. We are part of the time in Sturgeon Bay, and right now I'm in Appleton. I found out about this through the yoga studio email. I'm Catholic. I was born and raised Catholic. I still go to Catholic church, not all the time as much as I used to. And I really don't have any issues with Catholicism except for the people in charge make bad decisions. I am very interested in religion, and I think that there, as Gwen said, there's a lot of similarities in the values. And I'm just part of this because I think it's interesting to see where other people are coming from, their context. So that's why I'm here. I'm going to put my video off most of the time, though, because since I am at home, I have the luxury to go chasing after my dog and stuff like that. And I don't want to make you guys distracted by that.
All right, thank you. And we have latecomer, my friend Doris, just your name and what brought you to this class.
I'm Doris Bodenner, and my kids, like all of my friends' kids, don't go to church. They went to Sunday school every Sunday when they were little. And I think that the scientific discoveries and things that have been made make it hard for them to, some of the concepts of I was raised in a very conservative religion too, before I became enlightened and went to Hope.
Hope Church in Sturgeon Bay.
Right.
The very liberal church for many, many years. So it still is.
So I'm here to just kind of see if we can reconcile some of these things.
Great, great. So I hear seeker in everybody. So I wanted to start with a couple of little fun things. I gave everybody a little sheet of paper and a pencil. I would like you, and if you're at home, just do this on, whatever you've got. I'm going to give you 1 minute to draw a man. Okay, however you want to just draw a man. And you have a minute, and if you're not done, that's fine, but just start drawing a man. Okay. All right, pencils down, boys and girls. Tell me by show of hands, and do it high so I can see you. How many of you drew a stick figure? One? Nobody else? Oh, two? What else did the rest of you draw?
That was a good idea.
Ahead, okay. What else? Yeah, we got a whole, okay. Definitely second grade art. Though.
Yeah.
Minute. Well, I'm gonna have to finish. My son would have drawn a nose and a brow. Anything more sophisticated than second grade?
No,
Okay.
I drew something around.
All right, because this is the whole point. Most people draw a stick figure or some second grade, maybe max third grade. And the reason you do that is because that's probably the last time you had any art training was in those little grades. And so you've not grown out of that unless you are, you know, a natural artist or had some training. In the same vein, most people have not had any real religious training since the 3rd grade. Even those of you who grew up in Catholic schools, you kind of got the same thing over and over again, rather than expanding your religious knowledge. You guys are laughing, how come? Is that how it is? You have an Orthodox Jew?
He's anatomically correct.
Well, we all have our interests. We have our interests. You wanted to make sure we knew he was a man. Okay, so I too, my bio is that there was no religion anywhere in my family or on my block. Eventually some neighbors came and took my older brother to the Lutheran church, and that he got baptized there, and my parents said, well, we might as well get Joan done too. So I baptized Lutheran, might as well. And then some neighbors came later who took me to the Baptist church. And I loved all of the singing and Vacation Bible School and all this earnest, desire to be with Jesus. But I thought, well, if the whole idea is to be with Jesus, why don't we just kill ourselves and go be with Jesus? But that clearly was not what they were advocating. So I had some confusion very early. I'm a child of the 60s, so I threw it all in the trash can in the 60s. And was 1976, I think, when Star Wars came out. May the Force be with you. And I realized that saying that may the Force be with you is really the same thing as saying God bless you, or what is it, Salek Aleikum. I mean, it's just the, I wish the best for you, namaste. And I thought, well, I would like to be blessed, or the Force be with me, or whatever it is. So it renewed my interest in God. And I had a long business career, but when I was in my 40s, I went back to college and to finish an undergrad that I never had. And I was interested in, I've always had 3 basic questions. Who am I? Who are you? You particularly, and you collectively, and the world collectively, and how do we all get along together? Those were the things I wanted to know. And I looked in psychology and sociology and philosophy and literature and history for answers to those questions. And I went to a Catholic college, very small Catholic college, and you had to take 2 religion classes in order to graduate. So I took 2 religion classes and accidentally completely fell into the 2 most fabulous religion scholars I've ever known in my life, who led me into this. And they said, what are you doing in the history department? Obviously you love it. So I went on and did grad school and got a master's in theology at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. And then I still hadn't had enough. So my mentor had me on a PhD track. And I think I would have enjoyed that, except for the fact that you have to learn to read and write 5 languages, German, French, Greek, Latin, and English. And I really had no interest in doing that. So I said, okay, master's will be enough. And I started teaching and being more involved in religious topics. And then I felt the call to ministry, because I like being a part of people's faith journeys, seekers in particular. And so I wound up going to school in Minneapolis at the United Theological Seminary and getting a master's in divinity, which is a pastoral degree. And this is in my bio that I handed out, but also along the way, I have spent many weeks in retreat centers of all kinds. Someone asked me about Eastern Orthodox, which is a Christian particularly a Hindu retreat center that I loved. Every denomination of Christian that you could probably name. I've sat Shiva with Jews. I like cemeteries. I like any place where there has been prayer and a connection to the divine, and whatever brings people to that place where they feel connected to something bigger than themselves. And I think that could be almost anything. Okay, second little fun thing we're going to do. I want you to raise your hand if you think you know the religion, the major world religion that has the most adherents in the world in 2022. Okay, somebody say.
Islam.
Yeah.
No.
Christianity.
Christianity, 33%. Okay, so put 10 people together, 7 of them are going to be Christians. This is worldwide. Okay. Second most popular religion in the world. Islam, 25%. Christianity is the most declining religion. 50% of Christians in the world are Catholic. It's been said that the 20th century was a distinctly Catholic moment in world history. Christianity is declining. Islam is growing. It's right now there's something like almost 2 billion Muslims, and is expected to grow by 50% between now and 2050. And that's an especially important study, I think, for Americans, because most of our exposure to the Islamic world has not been positive, right? We think of the extremists, but that's like Christians, people who don't know Christianity, thinking that that guy's named Timothy, something that blew up the world. Timothy McVeigh. Every religion has extremists, and Islam does, of course, but so do Christians, and so do Hindus, and almost everybody. So it's not my practice here to talk about fringe stuff. Every religion has fringe stuff, but to get down to the founding ideas of the world's religions and what makes them so attractive and why they're so satisfying to people. So Christianity, Islam, does anybody want to guess, unless you know, what is the third biggest affiliation? And let me tell you, the remaining 3 are Buddhism, Hinduism, or unaffiliated. What would you guess is the third largest?
Hindu.
Buddhism.
I would say Buddhism.
Unaffiliated? Unaffiliated, yes, unaffiliated. That's a growing number. They either say they're secular, atheist, or non-religious, and that's over 1 billion people. I mean, we're talking, 1 billion is a big number, right? I mean, it's hard for me to get my head around about how many people there are in the world. Next comes Hinduism. So there are approximately 1.2 billion Hindus in the world as of 2022. And I don't have to tell you, these numbers are imprecise. It's very hard because it's all self-reporting, but this is generally what's considered. And then the last one would be Buddhism, which is 520 million. So it's only, what, half a billion Buddhists. I will say Judaism and Jews have been responsible for some of the most remarkable changes and literature and art and politics, and a significant change in world history. And they are 0.2% of the world's population. It's a very, very small, its influence has been enormous, particularly when you are aware of how small the denomination is. And there's a thing now, I keep up with all of these things. Christianity is declining in the United States. Like Doris mentioned, her children don't go to church. How many people have children who don't go to church, even though you sent them to Sunday school? And institutional religion is declining. in the United States and even more so in Europe. But spirituality is increasing. People who are interested in the spiritual life, and they say, I think a couple of people here said, the religion wasn't doing it for me. But they're very interested in the spiritual life and in a spiritual connection. And the last thing I want to say by way of introduction is that there are a couple of important things for me that I hope that you take away from the study of this book. And one is that every one of the world's major traditions has two arms. Let's talk Catholic because most people are Christian, because most people here are familiar with Christianity. You have the institutional arm, which is the church, which has a creed, which has a dogma, which has a set of rituals, which has a set of roles, however loosely or tightly they are followed. And you are a member, and there's generally some financial obligation associated with being a member of the institutional church. And then every church has a mystical arm. And a mystical arm means that the mystics have felt, and there have been mystics all through history in every religion. They don't need the institutional rules or information or obligations to connect them to God. There are some people who do, and for whom that institutional church is very important and very effective and very soothing, and they love being a part of that church. But a mystic, and let's talk about the saints. We have a lot of Catholics here. Saint Teresa of Lisieux, Saint Teresa, well, she was a very public saint. But when you were kids, didn't you have to read the stories of the saints in Catholic school? Saint Francis of Assisi. These are all mystics. They believe that they can have a direct relationship with the divine. They don't need the church to tell them how. I know I talk to a lot of people say, I just know, I hear God, I pray, whatever you want to call it, God, the universe, nature, Allah, whatever. But they can have this feeling that they are part of God, and that is a very personal relationship. And it exists outside of the institutional church for the most part. There is some. So for the Christians, it's the Christian mystics, the saints that you're probably familiar with. For Islam, it's the Sufis. And I think it was David said that he studied Sufis, and that's a mystical arm. For the Jews, it's the Kabbalah, the study of the Kabbalah. Did you have that as a kid?
No, but my brother.
Your brother did. Okay, it's not part of the institutional church. It's sort of this other arm. Buddhists are, they certainly have an institutional church, but they don't have it. That's going to answer a question I want to ask. Okay, I'll ask this question. Unless you heard me answer this question before, tell me what every religion in the world has in common. Every religion ever been is now, they all have one thing in common.
The divine being, God.
No, Buddhists don't have a God.
They need money.
Oh, that's true. Institutional churches need money. The Sikhs don't. They go around with a bowl, big. But institutional churches, that's probably true. Any other guesses about ritual?
There's a higher reality.
There's a higher reality.
They are not worried about themselves.
Right.
They're worried about the higher reality coming down and doing damage to them.
That's a very good one. But Buddhists don't have that. Buddhists don't have a deity, and they don't have a hell, and they're more concerned with. My favorite thing about the Buddhists is if you had a poison dart hit your heart, a lot of other religions would talk about, well, where did this come from and why me, and how am I going to deal with this? Where the Buddhist just says, get it out. Any other guesses about what all
Place of worship, maybe?
No, mystics are in a cave or anywhere in nature.
At an afterlife rather than the present.
No, not necessarily. Even the Jews didn't necessarily have an afterlife. Women aren't quite as good. Women aren't quite as good, boy. That's but it's not the answer. Okay.
Relationships and service to one another.
That's part of the answer. Okay, the answer is every religion in the world believes there is something wrong with the world. There's something wrong there. And they can make it better. Okay, and the common antidote, as Joe, you just suggested, is love, kindness, and serving, loving and serving, loving the God of your understanding and serving others is the antidote that's most commonly named by the world's religions.
So something is wrong with the world. A counter to that is, what is the world?
Oh, gosh. Okay, we have an existentialist here. What is the world? What is God? Yes, those are all good questions, but fundamentally you will find in this study, in any study of the world's religions, they all agree there's something wrong with the world and they all want to do something about it. And what they do about it can be quite different. Okay, so of the people, those are my introductory remarks, which were much longer than I had intended them to be, and they won't be in subsequent weeks because there's such a rich fountain of reading that we're going to be doing. And I'm going to ask you to just say, what did you see here? What did you notice? How did you respond to it? What do you want to share about it to see how other people felt? Okay, so let's start with this chapter, point of departure, because we're going to go on a journey together. And this is our point of departure. Most of us, like Huston, well, if you read his bio, Huston was born and raised in China by Lutheran ministry. So he lived in China in a very rural small town in China until he was 7. And then he came to the United States to attend a small Lutheran college with the intent of going back and being a missionary in China, because that's what he thought men did. But even though he went to a very small little town and a very small little church in Missouri, he got the United States and he went, wow, I am interested in everything here. He eventually got a PhD in philosophy, I think was his first one, taught at MIT and Syracuse and Berkeley, and became one of the world's foremost religious scholars. But I think it's clear all of us are fundamentally familiar with Christianity and how it works. And that's a good spot because you always say, oh, well, that Christianity has that. Oh, it doesn't have that at all. And since you already read Hinduism, you know it doesn't. Okay, so open your books to that first chapter, point of departure. And someone just start us, and it's good to start at the beginning of the chapter and say what you noticed or that you'd like us to talk about. And people online, you're also in this.
I like where he says that all the God seekers are lifting their voices in the most disparate ways imaginable to the God of all life. How does it sound from above? Like Bedlam.
I like that term, God seekers.
Mhm.
Yeah. And when you share a passage, it's good if you say what page it is. And like that's in the second paragraph. And then we can also see it. Somebody say, oh, I marked that too. What else anybody see?
I just like the fact he's trying to be very even-handed and fair with every religion, because at the time he wrote this book, I'm sure that was not the common way of looking at religions at all.
I think didn't it first come out in 58 or something
Yeah.
like that? Yeah.
I thought when I had to read it twice, and it's a whole different way of thinking because you don't find many people who are so open-minded, and he writes with such an open mind that it's hard for me to grasp and contain it and give it structure. I still have to read it again.
Snow came on.
I think that's kind of what he wants out of us, is that at the end of the day to absolutely have an open mind. But I like the fact that he's not going into the history so much of religions. I mean, there's so much going on today with religions for us to understand that, you know, we can each go back and dig out the history ourselves. I like the idea that he's not going to that.
Yeah, so he says it's not a textbook,
Right.
unless it's relevant, you know, like Muhammad coming in 500. I mean, that's like almost our time. We're only 2000, so 500 isn't that far away. Anyone else notice something from this first chapter?
Well, I have page 5, the main, at the top, the first chapter, the first paragraph. Having said what my concern is, the world's religions at their best. Let me say that what I take that best to be, beginning with what it is not. So he's trying to take a very positive attitude, and he's not going to talk about terrorism, which is so unusual today. That's all they talk about, you know, on other religions is the bad things. Really.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Because all of the world's religions, well, they call them the wisdom traditions, you know, before the internet, before libraries, books. I mean, all you had was religious literature for wisdom. And the older these books are, the Upanishads from the Hindus and the Torah from the Jews, they're just full of wisdom. And we don't get to talk about that very much, but we will here.
Well, I read the chapter on Hindus, and then I wanted to say this is very scholarly, and I read the chapter on Judaism.
Mhm.
And to me, the failing of the book is it doesn't point out all the bad actions that are taken in the name of good religion. And I think it's totally lacking.
Well, but we know that, I think.
But it's
Yeah, like Laura said, we're not going to talk about terrorism here. I mean, my own experience of religion and what I have observed, and I've been a hospital chaplain and an emergency room chaplain, and I worked in a nursing home where the need for God is a little bigger than it is for us who are just walking around every day. Religion has been a great source of solace and a great source of joy for, I think, the majority of people who adhere to spirituality or a code of some kind. And he is dedicated to, as he says, building bridges and not building walls between people. I really liked, remember what I said before? Oh, go ahead, Lauren.
No, someone just.
Oh, hi, Pat. Just pull up a chair. Thanks. We're just talking about this point of departure. Laura.
Yeah.
That's
So I have to manage this. So
wonderful. Brilliant.
here,
Ex-hospice chaplain person interested in spirituality. Yeah.
Oh,
Here. Okay, top of page 5, second paragraph. See where it says Lincoln Steffens. Lincoln Steffens has a fable of a man who climbed to the top of a mountain and seized hold of the truth. And Satan, suspecting mischief, had directed one of his underlings to tail him. But when the demon reported with alarm that the man's success, that he had seized a hold of the truth, Satan was unperturbed. Don't worry, he yawned, I'll tempt him to institutionalize it.
yeah.
So that's that, you know, the institutional arm, and not always, believe me, I mean, you point at me and yell at me if I denigrate church, institutional religion, because I do not mean to, but I am a mystic and I see what people who have left the church see, because we all know it has also done harm. But it is the nature of nature of institutions to perpetuate themselves, and often at any cost, whether that's Coca-Cola or Enron or Bernie Madoff or a church. I mean, every institution has to perpetuate itself in any way that they can. Okay, anyone else that you?
I thought right in the middle of page 5 also, where it stated the biggest mistake religion ever made was to get mixed up with people.
Was that you, Carol, that said you liked the Catholic Church except for the people?
Yeah.
No, I didn't
Run
say
it.
that.
Except for the people.
Somebody else said-
That was,
When?
oh, yes.
Somebody else said that.
Maybe.
Who said you like the Catholic Church except for the people who run it?
That was me, Dorothy.
Okay, we heard it.
Dorothy.
Yeah.
Because, you know, people are fallible and institutions are people and people are fallible. So of course they're going to be. But that's the miracle of these enduring religious traditions, is that they have been able to survive despite the interference of real people. Okay, here's another question. One of my mentors, in his very first religion class, we came in and there was a big circle on the board drawn with a line through it. And he said, this is all the religions that have ever existed in the world. Here's this half and here's this half. What's the difference? I've never figured anybody could figure it out. Said 50% of the religions that have existed in the world have existed and still, you know, even have small but loyal adherents. 50% are gone and forgotten. What's the difference? A book. If your religion has a book and it has a compelling story, it can endure. Come on, the Bible, the Quran, the Upanishads, the Vedas. Buddhists have wonderful texts that tell the story. If you don't have that, you don't grab people. Stories are just narratives that that share morals, but they're in story form so that you'll remember them. And like I speak very often at the Unitarian Fellowship in Ephraim, and I have for 20 years. And Unitarians are a wonderful denomination. They do wonderful work. Their people are just wonderful, but they don't have a story. You know, I mean, they have a story, but it's not as compelling as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you know.
It's like a bunch of short stories.
Yeah, it's a bunch of short stories. So it just isn't, you can't grab the kids with, you know, Noah's Ark and the flood and Jesus being a fisher of men. And I mean, I am a Bible scholar. I love the Bible, especially the Hebrew Bible, but I don't consider it a faith document. For me, it's a philosophical text of the history of an ancient people. In an ancient world, trying to understand their relationship with what they perceive to be their God. And I find it endlessly fascinating. I'm sorry, I keep talking.
One thing, I just got it in my mind that people need a code to live by. If they get in any kind of group, they want to have kind of like a uniform performance of some, you know, to make the reality peaceful. They say, if we can all abide by this few rules, we're gonna work, we're gonna survive, we're gonna, you know, grow. And I think,
it's a
I think
wonderful
there's a
thing.
need for that.
It's
and
anybody been a
definitely-
part of that in sports, especially, you know, or America, or what you said when you lived in Saudi Arabia, you basically had to be a Muslim. I mean,
I had to, well, I had to dress, I had to honor Ramadan, I had to wear a headscarf, I had to,
Yeah.
you know, do not put anything on top of the Quran and just, you know, everything.
yeah. And I mean, I have felt this way, and many people that I work with have said, I want to be a devout Christian so much. I want to be in that club. They seem so happy. And I get that. It's a very satisfying feeling when your world agrees with you and supports you in what you believe. But you know, and it
I think
does.
it's a human urge
It
too.
is a
It's,
human
it's
urge.
like, there's very few things in the world, if you look at mankind, that aren't predictable. They want to design a building, they want to know the numbers, they want to get this, and they want to get that, they want to know it before they get there. And that's something that is kind of inside a human being.
And there's a real innate desire to belong. So,
Can I just correct something?
I'm sorry.
I didn't have a choice because when you live in Saudi
Oh,
Arabia,
right.
you don't have a choice.
It's
Yeah.
cultural.
Yeah, it's not my religion, but I loved it because I knew I couldn't leave it.
Yeah.
You know,
There you
You
go.
could experience it
Wow.
and leave it.
Yes, I mean, I can, go home.
I hear you.
But I loved the experience of it.
Yeah, and well, like, you probably can't get a job in Saudi Arabia unless you're a Muslim.
No, that's not true. Well, I was a neuroscience nurse and I was recruited for the King Faisal Hospital.
Oh, I mean, if you're born and raised in Saudi Arabia and you're in politics or whatever, and you're not a Muslim, that probably makes it difficult for them to get a job.
If you're born in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. I mean, you were a foreigner.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, basically the royal family manages everything like that.
And, most people are aware that Constantine converted the Roman Empire to Christianity in the 4th century. And a lot of people also converted because they couldn't get a job if they didn't do what the emperor said. And, we grew up in a state where church and state are separate. And it's an ideal and it's also a reality. But most of the world, for most of the time, and still today, church and state are not separate. People complain, oh, the Pope is so powerful and he could do so many things, in past centuries. Well, when the king left a vacuum of power, because they were fighting about politics, the Pope would say, I'll take over, and people say, great, we're used to taking orders from the Pope. And I'm talking centuries past. But church and state were very, very aligned. Okay. What did anyone else know? I want you to write in your books and it's. I do like this thing on page 4, about 3/4 of the way down. And you mentioned this, Marty, that there isn't given Huston doesn't give much time to the bad things that happen in religion, but he does say the full story of religion is not rose colored.
Okay, well,
It is often crude. Oh, you didn't read that part. It is crude. Wisdom and charity are intermittent, and the net result is profoundly ambiguous. A balanced review of religion would include human sacrifice and scapegoating, fanaticism and persecution and holy wars. But the list would have no end, but that's not his interest here. That's what he goes on to say. That's the people. Thank you, Michael. I think that's important to point out,
Yes.
as his point of departure, that, like I started college as a philosophy major. In my search for why everything. And I learned over the years that philosophy is the search for truth, but religion is the search for peace. And that's the thing I always pray for, is a peaceful heart. How do I find a peaceful heart with all of and I do a lot of spiritual work, and people say, why do you do so much spiritual work? And I say, the point of all spiritual work is to learn how to keep your heart open in hell. And we all have experienced various forms of hell in our own lives. How do we keep our hearts open with love and gratitude for what is.
You know, I think one of the best things I ever read or heard, and it was the Dalai Lama that said, my religion is kindness. Kindness.
Yeah.
Imagine.
Okay, let me ask you a question. I mean, this is something I've been pondering lately. What is it, the 15th Dalai Lama we have now? The 14th. Anyway, he's the 14th or the 15th Dalai Lama, reincarnation of the same Dalai Lama. And he has said, our current Dalai Lama has said he will be the last. That he's not going to, you know how they find a Dalai Lama? They go around, he was found at 3. And he recognized things that had belonged to the previous Dalai Lama and seemed to know things that indicated to the people whose job it was to find the next Dalai Lama. And he said that he wants to be the last. And when I first heard it, I thought, all right, I guess we've gone beyond that sort of necromancy or mystic thing, but now I'm thinking, the Dalai Lama has been a source of inspiration and focus of love for a lot of people. I know Pat led a book, we had a book club meeting about, was this book about joy? Which is a great book, by the way. It is a great book. And I wonder, what are your responses to that? Whether you know about Buddhism or the Dalai Lama, what's your impression of should there be another person with that position of influence?
What did the Dalai Lama provide a reason why?
No.
I mean,
Well, maybe he did, but I don't know it.
I feel like it's giving up. I mean, or are we reaching a certain point in our evolution that?
I don't know why.
That's what I was thinking, the structure, the structure isn't going to be the same. We got the message, we've had it propounded over and over through time. And, some of us will go back and research that, and some of us, have an inkling of what that is, and we're supposed to be able to carry that and take it further from that point. It's kind of like a handoff signal to me.
Mhm.
I think it's a surrender.
He's surrendering.
Yeah, because the approach to China, places where they could live, where they live.
When did he say that? I mean, I was just wondering, did he say it a while ago or just recently when?
I don't know exactly, but it's just sort of one of those general things that I've learned that he said, and I've heard it referred to many times when reading about the Dalai Lama, that he wants to be the last. I think it may not be up to him.
But in some religions that believe in reincarnation, isn't there the idea that you need to at some point get out of that endless cycle? And if you're considered, if you're looking at yourself as, well, now how many times have I been reincarnated as this same person? At some point.
So tired of this.
Yeah, yeah. Wouldn't it be almost like proof that that path is worthy to be done with it?
That's a great thought. I hadn't thought of that. Does anybody else respond to that?
Well, there's this thing in Islam, the Turkish sultans were caliphs, they controlled it. And supposedly after they ended their rule, nobody could take it, that position. And I never quite understood that, but.
Sounds like ego to me.
What?
That sounds like ego.
Yeah, control.
Donald Trump, only I can do it.
Yeah, some sort of control system, but apparently other sects wanted to take control of it or something. I'd have to read more about it, but I never quite understood how they could close it off from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
The way they did.
Maybe where they are, the long view, their mission has been, they've quenched, they've come to the epitome of what their particular mission or their line, if you call it the silsila or whatever you call it, their line of transcendence from one Pope to the next, or from one, Dalai Lama to the next, has produced an effect, and it will carry on for a length of time. And, there'll be that to fall back on, but it's like, are we supposed to pick up from there? Maybe it's a question, he's saying something, but he's saying that you should be able to question within yourself, why is that happening? What am I to do?
Yeah.
And the lovers of that particular religion, they're going to be spontaneous in that regard to pull themselves forward.
One of the best messages I ever heard, I suppose it was a sermon, it was called "What He Was, We Are." And this man was a devout Christian and lover of Jesus. And he said, he sees Jesus as, the lover of peace and the bringer of peace and the bringer of love and non-judgmentalism and all these wonderful things. And he said, but with his death, he felt like the church should have said, what he was, we are now. And he felt like that was the role of the Christian church, which, Jesus never named, but just what you said, that followers should do as he did. But it's the same kind of question I have when some people tell me when they die, they don't want a funeral or a memorial service. And I said, well, what do you want? I don't want anything. Just bury me. And I get that. I understand that decision, but they won't be there, and I said, I kind of think funerals and memorial services are not for you, but for the people who love you and who want to honor you, and want to hold you one more time and have some closure with your death, which I also understand. But I think it's kind of the same question. I mean, you've enjoyed, a lot of people have enjoyed you, Dalai Lama. Why wouldn't you want more people to learn from you? Go ahead.
It says, the Dalai Lama institution will cease one day. This is the Dalai Lama speaking. These man-made institutions will cease, the Dalai Lama told the BBC. There's no guarantee that some stupid Dalai Lama won't come next who will disgrace himself or herself. That would be very sad. So much better that a centuries-old tradition should cease at the time of a quite popular Dalai Lama. By some stupid Dalai Lama, the 79-year-old spiritual leader is referring to a Chinese-propped successor. Indeed, the Chinese government has made it clear that it will choose the next Dalai Lama, a move that will guarantee a China-friendly leader, or it could mean the very end of the lineage altogether.
Oh, that's very interesting.
So,
Thank you. Did you hear that online? Could you hear what Pat said?
Yes, it kind of reminds me of the scandal about the parents that got their kids scholarships to big name colleges, even though they didn't really deserve it. How people can go to great lengths to get their kid in a certain position, and since this person is selected from a very, very young age, they don't really have any control over it. So you're kind of using these children as pawns. So I think it's very wise of him to say that.
Yeah. I see both sides of it. That's why I'm interested in how you respond.
So we basically lucked out with the Dalai Lama.
Well,
When
but
they
I
chose
don't
the
know
message.
about the previous Dalai Lamas. Have we had a stupid Dalai Lama before?
Well, isn't he just saying that the Dalai Lama isn't going to be, Dalai Lama is going to be chosen? There's a difference. You know what I mean?
Right.
He'll be a puppet of China.
And so it isn't gonna be, I'm not gonna go along, I'm not going to be that puppet,
Right,
whatever. So my line stops, my soul's work stops.
Yeah, and I know this is a diversion, but the Dalai Lama escaped China and lives in India, and Tibetan Buddhism is quite alive outside of China. And I would think it would be those lamas who would be the ones to choose a new Dalai Lama. I don't know, I guess it goes back to me that without a great story or a great person to sort of hang your faith on, it's very hard to hold people. People are not held by ideas, they're held by people, and they're held by a story and a tradition. So, anybody else have anything to say about that? Doris, did you start to say something?
I think there is a mentalism, though, that that is part of the transfer, the story, and the perpetuation of lamas through finding lamas, is one way to go. But the message is in Buddhism is a very disciplined mental states and performance through reciting stanzas through memory. So there is a lot of mental going on. And they can't enforce that, but the story won't do that alone. What's within the story within the story is going to be the thing that people have to grasp for, and make sense of whatever their evolution. I feel the Dalai Lama is one of the highest mental states that, can be achieved in the world,
Well, maybe I should wait for the chapter on Buddhism, but I'm so full of these anecdotes.
Yep.
I always felt like the purest of the religions was Buddhism. And it's, you don't see the Buddhist priests being scandalized like the Pentecostal ministers who are sitting with their assistants or whatever. That's an exaggeration, but it's a very, in my experience and way of thinking, it was very pure, really consistent with its ideals, particularly its clergy, its monks. But then I learned about in Japan, where Buddhism is very big, that the raccoons were eating these ancient Buddhist temples that have stood for thousands of years. I mean, these sacred buildings where the Buddhists were, and somebody said, there's no way you can get rid of them, you're gonna have to kill them. And the Buddhist said, no, we don't kill things.
Yeah.
But they wound up killing them to preserve these buildings that represent so much to them. And I was kind of crushed. I mean, again, it's two sides. Would it have been right to let the raccoons eat the temples? You think so? Okay, maybe it would have been. I don't know, but it was one of those things where I thought, okay, even the Buddhists can abrogate their principles under the right circumstances. I mean, yes, no?
Well, I heard recently that they greased the eggs of some of the geese at Sunset Park to prevent them from hatching. So it's kind of like that too. On one hand, we have this beautiful park where we want to see all the birds. On the other hand, they do something to stop them,
But there's just
It's
a
a
little too much
balanced thing.
poop on the ground.
Yeah. And whatever else, yeah. And another interesting point is in Islam where you had, they couldn't decide who was going to take over after Muhammad. So you have the ones who wanted to have the next perfect person do it versus the ones who wanted to have a family member do it. And they split up in that way to Shiites and the Sunnis. So again, they couldn't pass on the tradition nicely.
Yeah, and of course, the United States government is not a religion, but that what they call a peaceful transfer of power is such an unusual thing in world history. I mean, right, you read any history of any place, and once a leader dies, things are a mess. When I teach Bible, I love to tell the story of King David, who everybody knows who King David was, right? The greatest leader of Israel. He and Moses are the heroes of the Old Testament. I hate saying Old Testament, of the Hebrew Testament. And when David died, he had several wives, and so he had several sons from these several wives, and they were all ready to step up and take over for David. And I can't remember his name. Adonijah, maybe it was Adonijah, who I think was like the chosen one. And Adonijah was the son of one of his other wives. And of course, everybody knows Bathsheba, David and Bathsheba, their son, Bathsheba, who always had big influence over David as he was on his deathbed. She said, "Oh, David, you always promised me that it would be our son who took over when you were gone." And he goes, "I forgot, get him in here. We're gonna give him the crown." And then it became a mess, the succession of King David, as it usually does.
He was making alliances with tribes. He had many wives, right?
Yes.
So I don't know which one, but there was a tribe that he had a preference to.
Yes. And if I had read that, okay, and I am 74 years old, so there's a lot of things I know that I can't remember.
Right, and we all have that.
Yeah, and I might not remember when we talk about it, but it'll roll up. Anybody else have that?
Oh, yeah.
Because I know David's son. It was Solomon, of course. Solomon. Yeah, I was just thinking, because he had a lot of sons with A names. Yeah, so Solomon was Bathsheba's son, and Solomon followed David as king, but not without some of the other sons rebelling and going out, sleeping with their father's concubine. Just all sorts of juicy melodramatic stuff that was going on 5,000 years ago, as well as yesterday, today. Okay, come on, let's look at your chapter here again of what you read, or you can, if you or
He said he was not going to do something. He was not going to compare religion, a comparative, in the sense of status, which is
Right.
But then I thought again, how is another way you could do it? I said, well, you can see what the similarities are.
Yeah.
In them, rather than having a status, but seeing a theme going through between all the religions.
exactly, and he does a lovely job of that. It's like I had a teacher in one of my classes who just the whole semester was a complete waste, I thought, except for one thing that he said in class one day. And he was a devout Christian, his teacher, professor. And he said, he said, you might think that I think that Christianity is the best religion in the world, because I teach in a Christian denomination college, and he said that I want to tell you it's like this. He said, I can honestly tell you with my whole heart that my wife is the most beautiful woman in the world. And to me, she is. She is the most beautiful woman in the world. Now, I acknowledge that there are other beautiful women in the world, but she, to me, is the most beautiful. And Christianity, to me, is the most beautiful religion in the world. And I thought that was a wonderful way to put it. And I think I can remember the moment that I realized if I had been born in India, I would probably be a Hindu. And I said it to my mother. About fell off the floor when I said it, because she did not have my rational, dispassionate view of information. But it's true. Had you been born in Saudi Arabia, the chances are, if you had, or if I had, we would be Muslims too. But would be questioning and seeking. I think there are questioners and seekers in every time. And in every culture, it's just whether you can reveal it or not. And in our time, I just see there's so many things. Homosexuality is so out now. It's so normalized. that more and more of these stories throughout time are coming out of people who had to hide their sexuality. And people hide their religious seeking too. You just, how dare you say that? I mean, even I know I'm to keep my mouth shut. When I'm in the South, when I travel through the deep South, I don't say a thing because I think I don't have to say anything because they know I'm a liberal. And I don't cause any problems. Okay, well, I feel like we're doing all this talking and I want to do more listening. And so I encourage you with Hinduism, which is our next chapter, there's going to be a lot of questions and a lot of responses to how Hinduism works. Because Huston does start with the Eastern religions. And I'll just say this is a horrible generalization, but Western religions, which is Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, they all descend from Abraham, which are the Western religions. And Islam has much more in common with Christianity than you probably imagine. They look for God out there. They, what does God want me to do? What, you tell me if I'm bad, oh, I'm bad, I'm terrible, I'm a sinner, if I'm good, oh, I'm good, I'm good. And they look outward for answers. Eastern religions, again, terrible generalization, don't do that. They are taught to look inward and find out how God is reaching you. We're all different. Hinduism, of course, is the best at this. Hinduism says we're all different people. We learn differently. We express ourselves differently. We love differently. We understand differently. And we have to find the God that speaks to that in us. Because there are 300 million gods, which is not a distinct number. It just means a lot. But they're all the same God. And when that God finds that place, or you open up that place in yourself that can feel that relationship and hear that message, God is in you, not out there. And every religion is full of universal truths and local synchronicities or local uniquenesses, cultural norms. Like one of my favorite comedians who's Jewish, grew up Jewish, and he says, my mother, who taught us everything we need to know about our faith, really convinced us that God did not want us to sit on the furniture in the parlor. He says, and later I realized she just didn't want us to make a mess. And it's been said that in the Quran, which was supposedly Muhammad was illiterate, it neither read nor wrote, and that the Quran was dictated to him by the angel Gabriel. And one of the rules comes later in the Quran is it's good to have multiple wives. And so he said, yeah, did you know Muhammad? That's why we have multiple wives. He wanted there to be multiple, so he sort of nudged God on that one. But these are the questions we can ask and say, well, isn't that interesting? Okay, is there anything you want to say or?
Well, you're talking about looking inward, outward. How would you describe the primal religions or the nature-based?
Yeah,
religions,
the primal is neither Eastern nor Western. It's more tribal, and they vary terrifically. And I don't think I could make a generalization about, because I think the jinn or the God is in the forest or in the rock. Or, I don't
nature-based.
Yes, the nature-based, which are some of the oldest.
Hinduism is very much nature-based, isn't it? I mean, they see, a tree, the sacred cow. I mean, when I was in India, my biggest fear was that you'd hit a cow driving along because, you're in a lot of trouble, and yet they're walking around because they're sacred, going into food places and taking whatever they want. And, I mean, it's just, I don't know much about Hinduism, but I love how connected to nature they are, that everything is very special. And
Everything is
holy.
connected.
And it's kind of like our American Indians too, aren't they? Isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I just love, just love that about them.
What do they call it? It's the web, the golden web, but it's like a spider web. And there are points on the web that are connectors, but everything is connected. In Hinduism. And I had one surprising thing, and like you say, like when they say the Indians, the American Indians, you know, they killed a bear, they would stop the hunt and they would take the bear's heart and they would thank the bear or the buffalo for what this was going to give them. Some years ago, I built a garage and I planned this garage, so I have to cut the minimum number of trees down around my house to build it. And I only had to cut down one tree. So, you know, I had some guys that did a lot of work for me and they came over and they, you know, busy doing their thing and they cut the tree down and it was a very big tree and it fell. And then everybody, they were like, stop working. And I said to Jeff, the general, I said, are they on a break? I mean, well. And he goes, well, whenever we cut a tree down, we stop for a few minutes and thank the tree for what it gave us. And I thought that was so cool.
Yeah.
And it was such a surprise that they did that. Okay, last story of the day, unless you want to add anything. Okay, so Hinduism, if you want to come next time, is there